I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. After the death of Osama bin Laden, we'll ask the question, how can we forgive someone who took so many lives? Plus, bloggers at the Vatican. It was the very first gathering of its kind, and our own Rocco Palmo was there. And love is in the air in the Brooklyn Diocese.
Marriage is misunderstood today, and I think the best understanding of marriage is people that have made it work and have found their life in it.
Well, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. With everyone still absorbing this weekend's surprise announcement of the death of Osama bin Laden, the world's most notorious terrorist and the mastermind behind the September 11th attacks, the nation's attention has begun to focus on that site that continues to bear the scars of the attack to this day, Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan. This coming Thursday, President Barack Obama will visit Ground Zero to mark the al-Qaeda leader's death at the hands of U.S. Special Forces in Pakistan and meet with families who lost loved ones in the attack. A presidential proclamation released by the White House press office last week has also selected this Thursday as a national day of prayer. And surely prayers will be invoked and shared on what will undoubtedly be an emotionally charged day. But the question is, will any of those prayers be for Osama bin Laden and his forgiveness? Well, in a challenging column entitled, "What is a Christian Response to bin Laden's Death?" Father James Martin, the culture editor for America Magazine, ponders the Christian call to forgiveness, no matter the man or the crime. I spoke with Father Martin by phone earlier today. Father James Martin, thanks so much for being here once again on Currents. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Well, of course, a lot of people, I know myself included, have a hard time with someone who is responsible for the deaths of so many people and wanting to forgive that person, even though I know that we're called to. What are your thoughts on that issue?
Well, it is difficult. It's difficult for me. As I said in my articles in America and on Huffington Post, I worked down at Ground Zero for a couple of days and weeks after 9/11, and it's very difficult. I think what people need to sort of grasp or appreciate, though, is that this is what Christ asks us to do in very explicit terms several times in the New Testament. So while it's hard, it's also an essential part of the Christian life.
Right. Well, I love the fact in your article, one of the things that you brought up, one of the examples is, Christ himself on the cross forgiving those who were crucifying him. So he was going through tremendous pain then, but was able to forgive those who were causing him that tremendous pain. And as people who are called to be Christ-like, that's a great example of doing it. How are you trying to, in your own personal life, overcome sort of the human nature to not want to forgive?
Well, I think by remembering the example of Christ, first of all, sort of pointing yourself in that direction. I think second, by trying your best to remove any hatred we have for somebody in our hearts. And third, also, something that I think people forget is by giving yourself time. I think for me, a full and wholehearted and sincere forgiveness is better than one that's sort of half-hearted and that you just do for the sake of doing it. So, even yesterday at Mass, I was celebrating Mass, and I sort of stumbled on, whether or not we should pray for Osama bin Laden, which I did not. But, Jesus says, pray for your persecutors and love your enemies. So, it's a difficult thing. I'm not there yet, and I don't pretend to sort of tell people what to do. But, Jesus does. Jesus is very clear in the Gospels about what we're called to do, and maybe to allow people to think of it more as a goal, than something that has to be done, at the very moment that a wrong is done to you.
Sure. With the article that's online that you wrote about this very subject, do you go on and read those comments and the responses to it? And if so, what have the responses been?
It depends. Some of the responses we get are pretty crazy. I think in this article they were pretty thoughtful. I think people appreciated what I had to say, and I think it was trying to be a balance to all of the comments that said, I hope he's in hell, and, thank God he's dead, and things like that, which, no matter what you think of a person, simply aren't Christian. We can be happy that he's off the world stage. I certainly am happy that he's gone, but to sort of celebrate someone else's death is, I think, very unchristian. And, it's hard though. It's a very difficult. This is the hardest part I think about Christianity: forgiveness for someone who's just, basically in real life terms was a monster. Mm. So I think to say that this is a goal for people may help people to get there a little more humanely.
Sure. Yeah, and as you said, give it time, because that's kind of what it takes. Well, of course, the initial response, I know in my own life, my own experience, when I first heard the news, I kind of wanted to be like those people that got out in front of the White House and down around Ground Zero and wanted to, be celebrating and waving the flag and all of that. But then I had to take a step back and say, wait a minute, this is somebody's death. I can't be celebrating that. What were your thoughts about all of those celebrations that took place?
Well, I have to say it was understandable. Like I said, I live in New York. I worked at Ground Zero, and so I understood some of the elation. I was actually surprised that people were that organized and could get out in time and sort of celebrate like that. And it seemed to me, I could see it's sort of the difference between, say, a war ending, sort of peace breaking out, which I think would be a cause for celebration, and someone being murdered, which is a little different. So I found it understandable, but it wasn't something that I really felt like participating in, because I felt guilty basically about celebrating someone's murder. Yeah. So I found it understandable, but not something that I really wanted to join into.
Right. Well, we're in the same boat on that one. That was like the exact same response that I had to in my own experience sitting there watching TV that night.
And also I think I would feel differently if I were someone who lost someone in 9/11, or if I were a serviceman or a servicewoman. I would probably feel very differently. So yeah. So perhaps, and it's wrong for me to say that someone shouldn't feel a particular way, but I think once again, it's not about what I think or what I feel, it's about what Jesus says in the Gospels, right, which is what I try to tell people and sort of point them to.
Absolutely. Well, there's the example for us to follow. Well, James Martin, thanks so much. Father James Martin, culture editor of America Magazine, we appreciate your time, sir.
My pleasure.
Thanks. So, what do you think? Could you come to forgive Osama bin Laden? We'd like for you to share your thoughts and comments with us. Drop us a line. Our email address is dropusaline@currentsny.net. You can also tweet us or leave us a message on our Facebook wall. We'd love to hear from you that way as well. Well, there's more Currents coming up. When we come back, has Blessed John Paul already performed his second miracle for sainthood? The president of Peru seems to think so. We'll have that story and more coming up. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, they've come a long way, baby. An anniversary celebration for married couples in Brooklyn. But first, let's have a look at today's headlines. Well, Pakistan's Religious Minorities Advisor says the situation for Christians in that country is tense following the death of Osama bin Laden. Paul Bhatti says, quote, there are strong reactions of unreasonable fear against Christian minorities. Meanwhile, the head of the Pontifical Mission Societies in Pakistan says that Pakistan's government has placed the church on alert. He tells the Vatican news agency Fides that the government has called for church institutions to close and increased security outside churches. Osama bin Laden's death, meanwhile, came at a time when the al-Qaeda leader's popularity in the Islamic world was on the decline. New data from a Pew Research survey shows support for bin Laden in Pakistan fell from 52% in 2005 to just 18% last year. Bin Laden had greater support in Palestinian territories, 34%, but that was down from 72% back in 2003. And in what may be the oddest take on bin Laden's demise, the president of Peru says John Paul II should get credit for the death. Now, Peruvian President Alan Garcia said John Paul's miracle was to, quote, remove from the world the incarnation of evil, the demonic incarnation of crime and hatred. A second miracle is needed for John Paul to be declared a saint. He was beatified after a nun was cured from Parkinson's disease. Well, meanwhile, the president of Poland expressed gratitude to Pope Benedict on Monday for the beatification of John Paul. Both men agreed that John Paul's life marked a great turning point, not only for Poland, but for the world. The two men also agreed that the late pontiff's teachings, particularly with regards to the sanctity of human life, are of great importance. A day earlier, the Pope greeted the leaders of different nations who came to the Vatican for the beatification. Arguably the most controversial was Robert Mugabe, the Catholic president of Zimbabwe, who's accused of human rights abuses. Mugabe is banned from traveling to the European Union, but the Vatican, as a sovereign state, is not part of the EU. Back in 2005, Mugabe also traveled to the Vatican to attend John Paul's funeral. From Libya, the leader of that country's Catholics attended the funeral of Muammar Gaddafi's son and 3 of his grandchildren yesterday. Bishop Giovanni Martinelli did not comment on the funeral. Gaddafi's son and 3 grandchildren were killed during NATO airstrikes on a military compound. Martinelli has repeatedly called for an end to those airstrikes. Fighting in Libya has been ongoing since February, following calls for Gaddafi to step down. In other news, an Australian bishop ousted from his post after making controversial comments has some harsh words for the Catholic Church. Bishop William Morris is accusing the church of creeping authoritarianism after he was dismissed as a result of a Vatican-ordered investigation. The probe came after Morris called for the ordination of women and married men and suggested Protestant ministers could celebrate Mass to make up for a priest shortage. Morris says that his words, which came in a 2006 pastoral letter, have been misread and he believes deliberately misinterpreted. And Pope Benedict has offered his condolences now to the victims of last week's tornadoes in 5 southern states. In a message to Mobile, Alabama Archbishop Thomas Rhodey, the Vatican Secretary of State wrote that Benedict was saddened to learn of the tragic consequences of the tornadoes. The Pope also sent his prayers to the victims and to people involved in relief and rebuilding efforts. Well, the pro-life organization, the Susan B. Anthony List, is calling on people to contact their representatives ahead of a House vote scheduled for tomorrow on the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. The law would, as its name implies, ban federal money from being used to pay for abortions. Now, although the Hyde Amendment already bans that funding, Congress must vote on that law each year. The No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act would make the provisions of the Hyde Amendment permanent. And it was a celebration of the Sisters of the Brooklyn Diocese on Monday. We sent our cameras to Immaculate Conception Center in Douglaston, Queens.
Today we come to celebrate the promises and the vows of your religious life. They do not signify merely the membership in your individual congregations and religious orders. They signify a new way of life, a way of encounter with God. We're here tonight to celebrate the jubilee of many different sisters who are celebrating various jubilees from 25, 50, 60, 70, and 75 years of consecrated life.
I renew in joy and hope my vows of sobriety, chastity, and obedience, through the intercession of Mary.
Sometimes the vows look like restrictions, but they're really not. They're a way to live freely who God has meant you to be, to live in community with other women who share your same vision, to serve the church, to live with a real listening obedience to what the needs of God's people are.
We thank you for what you have done. You are great symbols in the church and reality also of that commitment and of that relationship to God that we all need and want.
My greatest wish is that young women could really understand how much joy, how much satisfaction, how much fulfillment a person has when answers Jesus' call.
The consecrated life will always be part of the church. We might not see the numbers that we had in the past of people living the consecrated life, but I think it will always be there as one of the means of witnessing to Christ in the church.
Congratulations to all the sisters. Stay tuned, there's much more currents ahead. Coming up, new media visits the Vatican. We'll talk to a familiar face who moderated part of the first ever Bloggers Conference. Welcome back. Well, they came from around the world, invited to this special event by the Vatican. No, we're not talking about the beatification of John Paul II, which happened on Sunday, but another gathering that took place a day later. Yesterday, the Holy See's Council for Social Communications hosted the Vatican's very first conference of bloggers. The head of the council said the purpose of that gathering was dialogue with the bloggers and to recognize the unique role that bloggers play in the world of communication. Among those in attendance were a couple of faces that'll be familiar to net viewers. Elizabeth Scalia is the blogger known as the Anchoress, in addition to being the managing editor for Catholic content at Patheos.com and a weekly columnist for First Things. Elizabeth is a regular panelist on Net's public affairs show In the Arena. Rocco Palmo, the author of the blog Whispers in the Loggia and a contributor to Currents, was also there yesterday. He actually moderated one of the conference's panel discussions, and he now joins me by phone from Rome to talk about everything that went on there. Hey, Rocco.
How are you, Matt?
Doing well, sir. Hope you are too. It's been a busy, whirlwind of few days here for you. Let's talk about this bloggers conference first. Tell me a little bit about your experience and who else was there and what you talked about.
Well, there were 150, as you said, from every language group. There were 6. It was kind of like the UN. We all had headphones on with simultaneous translation. But while there were 150 of us who were there were 850 applications that were received, which completely caught the officials who were planning this off guard. I mean, they only had the idea around 2 or 3 weeks in advance, and so they were thinking, well, we may get 50, 100, just throw open the doors, anyone who wants to come, and then here they are with 850 requests. So it was very interesting because obviously a lot of us who write pages know each other, but we've never met each other. We've never had the ability to come together, and it was really the Vatican and the Pope doing his job. Peter's mandate from the Lord was to confirm your brothers in their faith and keep them together, bring them together. And that's, the officials who have been planning it privately and publicly have always been very keen to say, this is just a first step. This is not, and it's not any attempt to clamp down the blogosphere because they know that will blow up in their faces. So it was, it was just a wonderful kind of getting to know you both amongst ourselves who write, but also to get to know the Holy See. And it was a beautiful and very humbling testimony of the role of the blogosphere in the life of the church today.
Yeah, and these are a lot of people. I know yourself included. You're no exception to this. You all have a lot of connections with a lot of people in the church, outside the church. Was there a lot of networking and things like that going on while you were there?
Well, there was. It was panels. The event was 4 hours top to bottom. There was about a half an hour break worked in midway. People that just kind of grab a drink and start talking to each other. But a group of French bloggers on their own initiative put together an after party at a bar right outside the colonnade of the Vatican. And literally there had to be around 60 of us who went over. And we were all speaking different languages to each other. Some of us had a hard time understanding each other. But, the conference ended at around 7:30. But the after party, if you will, went to around 1:30 in the morning. So it was a long night.
Wow. Well, of course, this happened just the day after the beatification of Pope John Paul II. Tell me a little bit more about your experience with that. And I know you were saying that you went, I believe, just yesterday, and there were still, to St. Peter's Square, and there's still tens of thousands of people there.
Well, there was a Thanksgiving Mass outside yesterday morning, and because of the demand to see the coffin of John Paul, it was kept in the open in the Basilica through the day yesterday. I went down because the lines, even as dusk fell on Rome on Sunday, the lines were still 5 or 6 hours to get into the Basilica. There were still tens of thousands of people outside. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go as late as I can. So I ended up going down at 1 o'clock in the morning on Sunday night into Monday. And there were still probably around 8,000 to 10,000 people down there. It took the better part of an hour still to get in. But it was so moving to get in there because you still had the place full, but very reverent. But above all, the guards, and the people who make the Basilica run were very generous as to give anyone who wanted as much time as possible to pray near the body. And people were literally, holding on to the barricades as people passed by just so they could have that moment. And I was lucky to be in there around 10 feet away from the body for close to an hour. A lot of my readers sent me different intentions to pray for and everything. And so that it was incredibly moving. So and that happened again yesterday after the Mass. But then last night, the body of John Paul, which had been in the Vatican grottos beneath the Basilica since 2005, was put in its new tomb on the main floor of St. Peter's in one of the side they actually had to move out a dead pope from the 1500s to give John Paul some space up there. And so now he's got his own side chapel, and it's under an altar. So that's probably going to become, the new hot spot, if you will, in St. Peter's to say Mass on every morning. The first Mass actually above the body was said this morning by John Paul's secretary of 40 years, Cardinal Stanislav Dziwisz of Krakow, the main advocate for his beatification and canonization.
All right. Well, and very quickly, Rock, did the subject of Osama bin Laden come up at all while you were there? Of course, it's happening right the day after that news broke as well.
Well, it did, because one of the participants in the conference was the Vatican spokesman, Father Federico Lombardi. It was amazing that he was still able to come to the conference, because he had been spending the morning fielding requests from the world's media about a Vatican reaction to the death of bin Laden. And basically, in a nutshell, what Lombardi's statement was on behalf of the Pope, on behalf of the Vatican, was that Christians never rejoice in the death of anyone. However, at the same time, Osama bin Laden, having been responsible for grievous crimes against humanity, to which he had admitted, now stands before the judgment of God.
Wow. All right. Well, what a weekend, Rocco. Thanks so much for joining us to tell us all about your experience there in Rome. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your stay.
Anytime, Matt. See you when I get home.
All right. Thanks. Well, stay tuned. There's much more Currents coming up. When we return, it may not be Valentine's Day, but the sparks flew this weekend in the Brooklyn Diocese.
We always left up to the God, and I think it's God that's keeping us together.
Finally tonight, last week, the world watched with a wide-eyed fascination as a prince married a commoner. By all accounts, the fairy tale wedding of Prince William to Kate Middleton broke audience records both online and on TV, with media outlets reporting a total of 2 billion people, yes, billion with a B, tuning in to watch the centuries-old tradition of a man and woman uniting in holy matrimony. And, while the men and women who gathered here in Brooklyn this past Saturday may not be royalty exactly, except to each other, of course, they are models of what it means to live and love in matrimony for the long term. Couples from all corners of the Diocese of Brooklyn gathered together with Bishop DiMarzio for the Office of Faith Formation sponsored event to celebrate their wedding anniversaries and renew their commitment to Amor.
I'm sorry.
Don't. Love means never having to say you're sorry.
Love means you never have to say you're sorry? Forget it. It doesn't work. If you love somebody, you will constantly say, I'm sorry. Sorry, I didn't realize this. I forgot this. I'm sorry if I offended you. That's real love.
Today is the Diocesan Wedding Anniversary Celebration Day. And basically couples who are celebrating a significant anniversary, 25 years, 30, 50 years. We have one couple today, 72 years. They come together to celebrate marriage, to celebrate their anniversaries, and they get a special meeting and blessing from our bishop, Bishop DiMarzio.
Believe me, my friends, your relationships are keeping the world together. Because without the sacrament of marriage, the whole foundation of our Western civilization is at stake. Marriage is misunderstood today, and I think the best understanding of marriage is people have made it work and have found their life in it. Yesterday, we saw the marriage of the century happen. The future king of England married a woman, and it was a beautiful homily given by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and supporting marriage as a sacrament, as an institution that is the basis of Western civilization. If we forget what it is, we are going to be weaker as a civilization, a world civilization. This decision you have made to stay with one another in good times and in bad is what characterizes what marriage should be.
I'm sure every couple here has stories of good and bad that they've gone through, and yet they've stayed together, they've kept their commitment together. And so in that sense, that's what we learn from them, the greatness of marriage, the importance of commitment, and the fact that marriage is more important, really, than the wedding day.
I now invite you to renew the promises you made in mutual and lasting fidelity. I, insert your name, reaffirm my marriage vows and rededicate myself to you in the same spirit as on our wedding day.
That's the feeling that of the celebration, that the renewal, we get married again.
It's a renewal, and you feel it. You know, it's there.
We didn't have many problems with that. We always got along very good. We always left up to the God, and I think it's God that's keeping us together.
If you really care about the person, you know, you just got to try to remember that, you know, nobody's perfect, and, you know, the grass is always green on the other side, and you just try to work with what you got. And if the good outweighs the bad, then, you know, you got something to work with.
I don't know what kind of husband I might have been, but I know the kind of husband that succeeds is somebody that forgets about themselves and is concerned about their wife and children. Wife first, then children. That's what I've seen in my experience as the most successful marriages, when a person can forget about themselves and concentrate on the others around them, especially the primary relationship with their wives.
It's so great to see those couples that have been married for many, many years now, and especially the couple celebrating 70 plus years together. That is how, you want to pick their brain a little bit and find out how to keep that relationship together for so long, how they did it. And that's a model to copy, definitely. They know what's going on. Well, that's it for this edition of Currents. Now, there have been attempts to reform it, to privatize it, to do away with it altogether. But what is it? Well, it is healthcare. We'll be talking about that on tomorrow's show. Until then, be sure to visit us online at currentsny.net. You can also watch reports and entire episodes at your own leisure there, right there in the comfort of your home office or your living room or wherever your computer may be. You can also friend us and follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great night.